Hi everyone, this is Professor Hammond, and I am going to be doing a bit of review of some of the concepts that we didn't get a chance to cover in class. First, I want to touch base on the management functions. We talked about these when we did our theory discussions because they started with Henry Fayol in the early 1900s, and he had 5 functions, and we have consolidated those over the years into 4, but they are very much the same. So just to give you a kind of a heads up of where these fall in our semester, first we have planning, looking ahead, setting those objectives, determining how those objectives will be met. We will largely be talking about this with strategic planning. So anytime an organization either thinks through what the corporate strategy is going to be or separate functions like marketing or operations decides functionally what their strategic objectives are going to be, planning is essential because if you don't know where you're headed, you're never going to get there. Secondly, we have organizing. So this comes up with organizational structure and design, how we decide to put our people together and what kind of groups, small, large, individual, teams. So we'll think through what that looks like of how we delegate tasks and get things done. So we'll talk about delegation, we'll talk about organizational structure, and then also this comes up with human resources, with hiring and training people as well. Third, we have leading, influencing employees to work towards achieving objectives. Influencing is definitely the key word there. So as a manager, you have to have that element of leadership. So we'll think through the leadership theories, kind of scratch the surface of that whole field of study, and then also spend some time thinking about motivation and how we get our employees motivated, largely from a situational point of view. Last, we have controlling, where we'll spend a little bit of time thinking about the mechanisms that we use to ensure that those objectives that we're responsible for as managers actually get done. So that sometimes that's individually at an employee level where you think about counseling and giving feedback, and sometimes it ends up being some discipline. And then also there's plenty of process mechanisms to help understand whether or not you're meeting your goals. There are 3 levels of management, and the main part that I want to accentuate with this is that each level of management is responsible for different functions. So those 4 functions on the previous slide play into what we would see here. So from a top manager level, they're going to be mostly concerned with that planning function and also leading, so that they're setting vision, they're getting people to buy into a direction, and then setting that path through the planning process. So that happens at that top manager level. The frontline managers, to jump to the bottom, they're going to be more focused on executing. So that's more of that controlling function to make sure that what you need to happen happens, and also a bit of the organizing function because they want to make sure that they've got the right structures in place to get things going. The middle managers, however, they have kind of an interesting role because they are responsible for all of the functions. So they have to set strategic direction with planning. They need to have the right people in place. They need to be good leaders and influencers, and they also need to manage on the controlling side to make sure what happens is what happens. All right, we also have some different types of managers. So pretty straightforward. You have general managers versus functional managers. So how I like to think of it is a general manager is maybe someone that is in charge of a whole manufacturing floor that has a number of different departments in it. So maybe there's the finishing area, maybe there's the quality control area, maybe there's the warehousing area or whatever. So they have lots of different functions that report up to them, and they have that hopefully bird's eye view of everything that needs to happen. From a functional level though, that's going to be someone that's more specific that, okay, so the example I like to use here is like an accounting manager or typically a finance and accounting manager who might be over that whole function. And they'll have people that are all doing finance and accounting related tasks compared to a general manager where there's going to be several departments that are probably unrelated. So that operations manager could have, the warehouse manager, which is a function, and the quality control manager report to them, and perhaps the machinery person reporting to them, and they would have all those different functions kind of underneath that general manager. Interestingly, the project manager is an interesting role, which is in high demand these days, where it's someone that has a distinct start and end to their projects that they'll be responsible for, and they'll bring in people from across the organization to get that job done. I remember working at the one of the banks I worked at. There was a project manager. She was responsible to launch the call center for that bank. And so in that project, we had the training manager, we had operations, we had retail banking, even the new call center manager, all those, and IT. So all those functions had to come together to figure out how are we going to make this happen. And then after they were done, they kind of went back to their jobs, or this was just a small part of their job. So you can have a project manager as well. A couple other things about the role categories. So thinking through, understanding what each one of these mean, they are divided into 3 groups. Interpersonally, a manager could be responsible to be that figurehead, like the voice of the organization, like Dr. Stoll is for us here at Cornerstone. They have to be that leader and that influencer. They also might be that connecting point, that liaison in between 2 areas. So they might interact with another division to maybe say, hey, we're doing this, what are you doing? Let's make sure we coordinate and get things done. So if I was in marketing here at Cornerstone and I was working on the website, I would also need to interact perhaps with IT because they're the technical side of making sure that that works properly. All right, informational. They also are responsible for communicating information, right? So monitoring is looking outside of the organization and inside, paying attention to what is happening so they can see what information is flowing, whether it's accurate, are there rumors circulating, and just being aware of what's happening. But then on the flip side, they also have to take that information and communicate what's important to their people as a disseminator, whether that's trends happening out in the marketplace, or perhaps that's information coming from the president or the CEO of the organization and saying, okay, what's important for my people to know, and then sharing that appropriately with your employees. So sharing information. They also might be a spokesperson for your company or your division or your department to report out what's happening and the accomplishments of your group too, which is cool. And then lastly, they have decisional roles, whether that's thinking of new ideas, which is that entrepreneur, like not just staying status quo, but what can we do to push the envelope? Dealing with disturbances and conflict happens, and many times that manager will be called in to say, hey, you need to figure out an issue maybe between 2 employees or between your area and someone else's area. How can we work together better? Bringing some harmony. Deciding how to allocate resources. So how many people do we need to staff the front desk today or this weekend or this month? Do we need to hire new people? Do we need more office supplies? And what's that going to be cost? What will that cost us? And then a lot of times there is some negotiation, and that could be negotiating schedules. That could be negotiating pricing with a customer. That could be negotiating resources for their area of responsibility. So lots of things they could negotiate. I also wanted to just remind you guys of the organizational culture elements. So make sure that when you're sitting, you go back to that JPEG, that infographic that's posted on Moodle. We have the elements of culture. So these are the different things that help show what a culture is. Those heroes, those role models, the stories we tell about ourselves, the slogans that help get us on that same page, like building a life that matters. The symbols, those are those physical artifacts that we can observe and how we behave and how we talk to each other. And also it comes out in those ceremonies, whether those from a daily routine point of view or those annual celebrations that really start to show who we are as an organization. Also, this is the onion model that will be very important for you to understand and be able to recreate. We talked about it in class, we'll talk about it again. Just understanding those three levels of organizational culture. We have the outside layer, which is our artifacts. That's all those things that we observed in our cultural elements. And then hopefully those connect to the values that that organization has articulated. Sometimes there's a disconnect. There needs to be a match between what you observe and what values there are to be a strong organizational culture. And the basic assumptions is at the core. Those are those things that are just unspoken. This is the way we are. This is the way we do things. It's the why behind the value. So if I say that we value innovation as an organization, well, why? Well, we might say we value innovation because change is good. Change is the way that we stay relevant. So if that's our assumption and those are our values, we should see a connection between that and the things that we observe in that organization, whether that's regularly asking for feedback, implementing new ideas, giving time for people to try new things and not penalizing them, having mechanisms in place for people to share new ideas and having time to implement them. So you should see that connection. So in that Zappos video, we saw that casual kind of fun atmosphere was not only something that they valued and had on their like core values, but it was reflected in the way they worked and how they set up their offices and how fun and zany and crazy that their workplace is. And then really that assumption that underlies everything is that people that have fun at work are going to be better workers and they're going to be better equipped to deliver happiness, which was one of their slogans or core values.